Okay, we are so happy to have Lauren Fosnight presenting this session called Total Participation Techniques in the Comprehension-based Classroom at PSMLA's first ever virtual conference. My name is Rich Madel, and I will be hosting today along with Edith. This session is being recorded, and if you're tweeting or posting on social media, we welcome you to include @PSMLA1 and the hashtag PSMLA21 so that we can see and share all your thoughts. Our presenter's Twitter handle is L_Fosnight, if you would like to tag her as well. For attendance purposes, please be sure that your displayed name matches the name that you use to register for this conference. If you're unsure to do so, let me know in the chat and I'll give you instructions. So please welcome me please join me in welcoming Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My session today is titled Total Participation Techniques for the Comprehension-based Classroom. I've been teaching with comprehension-based or CI techniques for about the past 3 years. I'm going on my 4th year in the classroom, and I teach at Germantown in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania. So I'm going to get started today by talking a little bit about how to build a really strong foundation for total participation techniques. I'm going to talk about what those are. And then I'm going to be showing you some videos from my own classroom this year, and then wrapping up with some reflection. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about my why for giving this presentation. My motivation for this presentation was twofold. One, when I was a kid, I felt like I was a very anxious kid. I never wanted to raise my hand. I never wanted to talk in class. And I often felt like I didn't have many opportunities to have my voice heard or to have my knowledge recognized. And then stepping into teaching, I realized that even though I knew that experience as a kid, even though I knew what it was like to be that anxious kid in the room, I wasn't really meeting my students where they were and offering opportunities for those types of kids to really have their voice heard and to demonstrate their understanding confidently in my classroom. So that led me to really try to get to know my students' participation preferences a little bit better. And a lot of students I found said that they wanted to participate in class. They just wanted a teacher or a peer to ask them. So that really led me to explore what are some different ways that I can allow students to demonstrate their understanding. And I've got to say, I was struggling a little bit in my preparation for this presentation because this year in particular has been hard. I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that way. In terms of participation, in terms of focus in class, this year has been tough. And I'm going to be showing you some video demos from my class. And I felt like it was important to include demonstrations from this year because they are far from perfect. But I want to show what it's like to be actively working on these strategies. I'm no expert in these techniques, but it's something that honestly, I felt like I was kind of crashing and burning at when I first started implementing some of these things. So I want to show what these things look like in progress and in growth. So before I dive into what I'm talking about when I talk about a total participation technique, I want us to do a little quick write. So I just want you to grab a piece of paper or you can open up a document. I'm going to give us 2 minutes. I'm going to join you in doing this activity. And I just want you to think about these 3 questions. I'm not going to ask you to type them in the chat, so you can just write them on a piece of paper. I'm going to give us 2 minutes to just jot down your thoughts about these prompts, starting now. Okay, and you can begin wrapping up your thoughts. It's totally fine if you didn't get to all of the prompts. We will revisit these at the end of the session, so you can just set those aside for now and we'll come back to them. All right, so now we're going to dive into what I'm talking about when I talk about total participation techniques. So the idea for this presentation actually came from a reading of Persida and William Himmeley's book, Total Participation Techniques, Making Every Student an Active Learner. So here's how they define TPTs, or total participation techniques. They write, TPTs are teaching techniques that allow for all students to demonstrate at the same time active participation and cognitive engagement in the topic being studied. And I don't know if have any of you read this book? Is anyone familiar with this text? I see a few hands. So one of the things that Persida and William Himmeley really emphasize in this book is the point that these techniques are to be used for fostering higher level thinking or higher order thinking, that they're really intended to move beyond like basic comprehension level prompts. And the reason I want to mention that at the beginning of my presentation is because I think while promoting that type of cognition is obviously very important no matter what level we're teaching, I also, in my presentation today, am going to be presenting a lot of techniques that kind of aim for more of that comprehension level sort of processing. And the reason I want to speak to that right now, well, one, I teach primarily level 1 courses, and it's not that higher order thinking can't happen in those level 1 courses, but I think something we need to keep in mind is that when a student is just starting off in a language, the simple act of processing everything they're hearing and everything they're reading for the entire duration of the class is really heavy mental lift, right? Especially in those first stages of acquisition. There is a blog post that I will drop in the chat by John Cowart at the end of this presentation about mental lift and how that might look different in the world language classroom as compared to other disciplines. And I think that can be a really powerful, if you're looking something to share with parents or administrators or other stakeholders, I think that blog post does a really nice job of illustrating how we conceptualize mental lift and how we conceptualize higher order cognition in our classrooms. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about why we need to think about using total participation techniques. And I think a lot of these are probably pretty obvious, but I love this quote that Himmeley write. They say, and I know it's kind of hard to read against the brick, my apologies for that. They say, at its finest, formative assessment engages students in taking ownership of their own learning and their own self-improvement. So they're recognizing in the moment what they understand and adjusting the way that they're participating or adjusting the way that they're seeking to understand the language in response to that. So I want to talk about these 5 things. These are the things that, for me, were my main motivators in exploring total participation techniques. So number 1, gaining immediate evidence of what students are understanding and being able to adjust my teaching in the moment. I'm sure we all do this throughout our classes in many, many ways. I'm going to get into some ways that I do this in my own practice in a bit. 2, opening opportunities for more student voices to be heard. This harkens back to my experience as that middle school student, often feeling like I conceptualized participation as raising my hand and speaking in front of the whole class. So how are we diversifying that? How are we honoring the full spectrum of voices in our classroom? 3, really helping students develop a sense of self-efficacy. And you're going to see that in a little bit in a video demo of doing some write and discuss, really showing them in the moment what they're capable of and inspiring them to strive for, higher and higher order thinking and just better participation and better language production and stronger understanding. 4, maintaining students' focus. For me, this is huge. Once I started realizing that I really needed to be implementing these techniques like every other sentence in a middle school classroom, especially this year, to keep them focused, to keep them engaged. It really changed my practice a lot. And then 5, to be able to celebrate student success in the moment. And this is one of the things that I'm trying to work on the most. And that you'll see in my video demos, there's a little bit of room for growth, but I think it's so powerful when we can just stop in the moment and recognize, wow, you all, every single one of you just showed me that you understood that question. That's powerful. All right, so how do we build a really strong foundation for total participation techniques? Before I dive into these 6 things, I want to read this quote because this is what comes first. The environment must be one in which teachers trust students, students trust teachers, students trust one another, and students trust themselves. And in tandem with that environment of trust that I know we all strive really hard to build, balancing that with an approach that centers students. I know that we all work to do that in a comprehension-based classroom where the curriculum is our students' lives and the events in the broader communities to which they belong. But all of the techniques that I'm going to be talking about today are kind of like icing on the cake that come after we've built this environment of trust, and that come after we've worked really hard to center our students' lives and interests in our curriculum. Like they're going to fall flat if we're talking about things or doing activities that aren't of interest to our students and aren't engaging to our students. So obviously those things come first, but some other things that are going to help build a strong foundation for TPTs. One, as I mentioned, celebrating the heck out of kids taking risks, celebrating the heck out of kids going above and beyond to meet your expectations and to exceed those expectations that you set for their participation in class. 2, making your expectations crystal clear. And I think that in teaching middle school, this is particularly this is something that I just have to do every single time before we start an activity or before we do an activity we've already done, is to say, who can remind me of one thing we can do to make this activity successful? And then we go around the room until we get the 5 things that we need to do, but just being really, really consistent, having those things on my rules poster and explaining the why. I think with middle school students in particular, it helps them to know, well, why do I need to hear every single voice? It's because I care about you. It's because I care about being able to assess your comprehension in the moment. 3, providing consistent and systematic opportunities for student reflection. So having them reflect on how they're meeting expectations or exceeding expectations for their participation, having them reflect on the ways that they seek to demonstrate their comprehension in my classroom. 4, keeping things novel. And in the handout that I'm going to put in the chat at the end of this session, it's going to offer lots of tweaks that you can use to make all of these techniques feel fresh, because I think it can get pretty old pretty quick if you're doing the same kind of stop and jot sort of thing every day. So keep it novel. That doesn't mean creating brand new strategies. It just means tweaking something small. And I'll get into some ways that we can do that. 5, making things systematic, gathering data systematically. And I want to hone in for a moment on this document. This is the framework that I use daily in my classes. So it has a space for folks who don't speak Spanish. It has a space for their warm-up, a space for doing a quick write, and then a space for doing an exit ticket or like a quiz at the end of class. This is the same framework that I use every single day, and I will drop this in the chat at the end. But students know exactly when I say we're going to do a stop and jot, o vamos a escribir, we're going to write. They know exactly where to go in that space. So I'm not spending time and I'm not spending energy breaking down how we should be doing this. They know exactly where to go. They're using the same framework every day. I might tweak 1 or 2 things. I might change up what kind of warm up we're doing, but it helps me know exactly where to look in gathering data, and it helps students know exactly what's expected of them. All right, and then my last thing is remaining comprehensible, and this is something that I'm striving to work on too in my practice. Going slower than we think we need to make sure that every student is on board every step of the way. I think during the classes where I struggle the most with participation, it's because I'm not going slow enough or I'm not establishing meaning clearly enough. All right, so now we're actually going to get into some of those techniques, get into some of those demos. But before we do that, I'm going to drop some questions in the chat. These are some questions that I would like for you to reflect upon as we watch these demos. You're going to see two parts of class, or two sections in total. You're going to see me doing leading some guided oral input, or some conversation, some structured conversation. And later you're going to see me doing a write and discuss. But here are some questions when we watch that first demo about just thinking about how these things are happening in my class. And one thing I want to say before I show the video is that this is from our 4th day of class. So there is a lot of English in the video that with time transitions to being in the target language, but you will see a lot of English in this video because it's our 4th day of Spanish 1 for 6th grade. All right, so those questions are there for you in the chat. Feel free to write them down on that piece of scrap paper. Feel free to type some thoughts in the chat, or feel free to just make some mental notes to share out afterwards. I will ask some folks to share their ideas. All right, tell me when I share my screen. I'm going to begin playing the video, and then I'm going to stop and check and just make sure that we can hear this sound okay. I apologize for the vertical filming in my class, but I just want to make sure. Actually, I don't think I shared the sound, so let me do that again. Okay. So let me know if you're not. I'm going to show you 2 segments. It's going to be about 8 minutes in total. Let me know if you have any trouble with the sound or with the quality of the video. All right. Here we go. Miren el calendario. Rich or Edith, can you give me a quick yes or no? Is that video quality and sound okay?
Yeah, I see it. I hear it.
Perfect. El calendario fantástico de periodo de clase. Calendario. Calendario. En inglés clase. Calendar. Miren el calendario de periodo de. Turn to somebody near you and tell them what you think periodo de means. Go. Period. Periodo de is period. D. That's you. That's you. I knew that. Periodo de. Your period D. See? That's it. All right. 3, 2, 1. tell me with a raise of their hand what morado means in English? Arden? Marker. Oh, close. So marcador is marker, but it's the color of purple. My marker. What do you think, Maya? Purple. So morado is purple. So I'm going to ask that question again. Clase. El calendario, piensen. El calendario de periodo de es morado? Sí o no? Show me your thumb. Sí o no? No. Sí o no? No. No es morado. Can I see that? No es morado. Clase. El calendario de periodo de es rosado, ¿sí o no, clase? Sí, 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 clase, 3, 2, 1, okay, and I actually want to skip to later in the lesson as we're wrapping up this discussion. We have about 3 more minutes and then we'll chat. Show me piensen on your hands. Piensen. Piensen clase. Lunes es fantástico. No. No. O horrible. Horrible. Clase. I'm happy. Clase. Lunes es, watch. F, you can join in if you want. F. N, N, T, that's a drum. S, E, ¿Es fantástico o es horrible? Horrible. Okay, clase. Levanta la mano. What do you think I'm asking you to do if I ask you levanta la mano? Anna? Raise your hand. Levanta la mano. Si tú. Si tú piensas que lunes, okay, so tú means you. That's why I walked around pointing you. Tú. Si tú piensas que lunes es fantástico, levanta la mano. Oh. Clase. Miren a Nathan, and we're going to say this all together. We're going to turn to Nathan and we're going to say, can everyone see the sign from where they're seated? Yeah. I can't get it off. We're going to say, no lo creo, which means I don't believe it. We're going to say no lo creo. Let's practice. Say it with me. No. Lo creo. Miren a Nathan and repeat after me. Nathan. No lo creo. All right, so I want to pause here and just take a moment before I talk about some of the things in that clip. I want to open up the opportunity for y'all to share anything you noticed that helps students know exactly how they should be answering, that helped encourage participation from students, or any other questions that came up. So feel free to go ahead and type in the chat, or I think we are a small enough group. Yeah, I think we're a small enough group. If you want to just unmute yourself and share something, feel free to do that as well. Yeah, and I'll just read some of what I see in the chat. Yes, no, listening and responding chorally. We'll talk about choral responses. Giving hand signals, physical response, we'll talk about that too. High energy, showing comprehension, being expressive, lots of physical response and props to support comprehension. Use of English for clarification. And that's something that I try to do less and less as we go on throughout the year, but especially in those first days, I want to make sure everyone understands what I'm saying. Repeat the question again. Yeah, repeating the question helps so much. And voice tone, cool. If more things start coming up for you as I'm talking, feel free to put them in the chat. I want this to be a collaborative space. I want to learn from you all as well. So if you see something or if it makes you think of something that you do in your own classroom that works really well, feel free to put it in there. Yeah, so I do want to, Erin, if I can just take a moment to highlight your comment, specifying exactly how students should answer and modeling that for them. And that's something that I could have done better in that clip, but letting them know if I'm expecting a raise of their hand, leaning forward and using my own movement to indicate what kind of response I want from them. So leaning forward and letting them know by doing this that I'm expecting the whole class to shout that out. So I'm going to continue diving into some of these techniques in a little bit greater detail. Like I said, these things are kind of like the icing on top once we've strived to build strong relationships with our students, develop an environment of trust, and center our students in our curriculum. These are some nice ways of encouraging whole class participation. All right. So this is my choral response checklist. It's included in the handout that I'm going to give you, but this is a resource that I actually created for myself. When I would go back and watch, I would record myself, I would watch demos of my teaching, and then I would go back and I would use this checklist, and I would literally, I would just sit there and like check things off if I was doing these things. And it was so eye-opening. And you might have even seen, I want to highlight just a couple, particularly this last one here. Like, there are students in every class, especially at the beginning of the year, as we're like beginning to norm, that aren't participating in those choral responses or whatever other participation check it is. And I think it's so important to lead with curiosity and approach those students individually. You might have even seen a student in the lower left-hand corner of the shot who like clearly was not responding to my questions. Just to approach those students individually, say, hey, can I share an observation with you? This is what I'm seeing. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Some students will say, yeah, I was just zoning out. Some students will say, I'm really tired. I'm sorry, I'll do better next time. But don't let yourself, I often I fall into the pitfall of like taking less, like if not everyone is responding competently to my questions, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something wrong. And that might not be the case at all. And when you check in individually with those students and lead with curiosity and lead with questions, I think it can be really eye-opening. And then the other one that I really want to highlight, we already touched on that. Clarifying exactly how and when we want students to answer was a game changer for me. Coming up with my own set of like gestures that were cues for students about whether I was soliciting whole group participation or individual and small group participation was really key as well. You can read through the rest of that checklist in the handout, but I want to move on to talk about some of these techniques in particular. So this one is a turn and tell. I think I first started doing this after watching Tina Hargaden do it in some of her demos. The reason I use turn and tell rather than turn and talk is because I and Himley in their book conceptualize a turn and talk as something that requires perhaps individual processing time. And then students are going to turn to each other and talk for several minutes in partners about this topic. A turn and tell is just super. I have not shared my presentation yet, but I will drop all of the links and all the resources that I've talked about at the end in the chat, so no worries. But a turn and tell is just really quick, like turn and tell somebody near you what I just asked, or turn and tell somebody near you everything you've understood from the conversation so far. And it's also a wonderful opportunity for you to just like take a sip of coffee and breathe for a second. I also really enjoy turn and shows. It's just a nice little, it's one of those ways of changing something small rather than like everyone show me, miren, or like look at, or everyone show me, see or no. You can just have them turn to a partner and show them what triste looks like. So nice little way to spice things up. TPR and show me are slightly different, but both related to, are both grounded in physical movement and gesture. So TPR, I mean, there's a lot of different conceptualizations of TPR. I'm not going to go too into depth. You saw me do a little bit of that when I was asking students to like show me gestures that correspond with vocabulary. But show me is more like, show me on your hands, like sí o no, or show me stand up if you think this is true, or sit down if you think this is false. It's a nice way to kind of give students a body break while demonstrating their comprehension. And I love this. I don't know why I didn't start doing this until this year, but when I run out of time for a quiz, students know every day they're going to have an exit ticket. They're going to have some sort of assessment before they leave my class. And when I like run out of time and only have 3 minutes left, I just tell everyone to close their eyes. I'm like, cierren los ojos. And then I just have them raise their hand if they think what I say is true, and keep it down if what I say is false. And then I just take note on who gets the question wrong, because almost all the time they're getting them right. I just take note of any students who get the question wrong, and I can just grab them after class and be like, hey, are you feeling okay? Like, I noticed maybe that you didn't feel as confident in today's activities. So it's a great variation when you're running short on time. Listen and draw. I love listen and draw, both because it really helps students maintain focus, and it serves as a wonderful way of fostering some material for extension activities. So listen and draw is just when students are listening to you tell a story. I try to keep them for the middle school level pretty short. It's not that I'm not doing like other comprehension checks, but it's usually, I usually don't do this when we're like co-creating something. If we're like story asking or like creating a one-word image together, I find this to be a little bit hard for students to like be drawing and like generating ideas at the same time. But this is great if you're like telling a cultural story, or talking about maybe a recent event in the target culture. Maybe students listen to you talk about that. They're watching you establish meaning of the words, and then they're just drawing a picture to represent their understanding, or maybe like drawing a comic frame or like a storyboard. And then you can collect those and use them for story retells, use them for like listening extension activities where they have to listen to you describe a picture and match it with the picture. And students love seeing their pictures on the board. They get so excited. And I always say, you can write a note if you don't want me, if you like do not want me to show your picture in front of the class. I always let them note that. And then there are a couple of kids, but most of the kids, even if they are not even if they are not self-proclaimed artists, love like laughing at their stick figures up on the board. All right. So we're running a little bit short on time. I'm not going to show you a demo of a quick write, but y'all, if you do write and discuss, this was a game changer for me. Before we do a write and discuss, which I am going to show you a couple minutes of, before we do a write and discuss, I have students go back to that daily framework in the writing space, and they know that they have to write for 1 to 2 minutes, everything they can remember about the discussion in English, Spanish, or Spanglish, because the goal is for them to process what they heard, to demonstrate their comprehension. And if they want to push themselves to write in the target language, that's great, but that it's not a writing activity per se. It's really just to build them up and set them up for success for our write and discuss. I used to really struggle with write and discuss. Like I felt like I was getting super weak responses, and like our stories were kind of boring. And then I started having kids do a quick write beforehand. And I want to show you a video of what that fostered in doing a write and discuss. A write and discuss isn't necessarily like a total participation technique, but allowing students this processing time to prepare their thoughts ahead of time. I had students on the 4th day of Spanish, spontaneously creating with the language to offer me sentences during the write and discuss, which I have never seen before trying a quick write beforehand. So I just want to show you a quick video of that. Okay, here we go. This is also our first day doing a quick write. I often will just like draw popsicle sticks or use Class Dojo to pick people to share sentences, but that since this was our very first time doing it ever, I just asked for volunteers to kind of lower their effective filters. Okay, and here we go.
We're going to write. So I encourage you, if you can, if you're feeling confident enough with the words that we use today, I'm going to put this word up here too. What as lunes? So I encourage you, we should have all tablets closed, all eyes up here. All tablets closed, all eyes up here. Nathan, can I have your tablet closed? Oh. Thank you. So we're going to be writing in the escritura space. I want you to strive to write. I want you to strive to write in Spanish.
Sorry, y'all. I'm setting up a quick write. This isn't a write and discuss. This is what comes beforehand. So I'm just going to skip ahead because we're running out of time. All right. So this is the actual write and discuss that doing this quick write leads to. All right, here we go.
Magic for your language learning. So what you want to do when I'm writing up here is, I'm going to make it nice and big so you can all see it. You're going to want to make sure that you're reading along, seeking to understand the language that we write. We're going to be writing a summary of our discussion for today, and we're going to be doing this almost every day. I might be asking you some questions that I want you to answer out loud. I'm also going to be taking sentences from people who volunteer for today. So I'm going to get us started. Clase. This is a sentence that I want everyone to shout out if you know the answer. Clase. Hoy es lunes o martes. Clase. Lunes or martes. Shout it out for me on 3. 1, 2, 3. Lunes. Lunes. Sorry, I didn't give you the count off. Hoy es lunes. So that's how we're going to start out our writing. Hoy es lunes. Who can give me another sentence in English or in Espanol, in English or Spanish, to add on to our writing? Arden?
Clase es periodo D.
Yeah, heck yeah, Arden. La clase es periodo de. What else can we say, Matthew?
Calendario azul y I don't know how to say it in Spanish.
That's awesome. You can give it to me in Spanglish. Thanks so much, Matthew. El calendario es azul y rosado. Classic. Look at the marker in my hand. Es rosado o azul?
All right, so for the sake of time, I want to cut that video a little bit short, but throughout the rest of that time, that activity went on for about 3 more minutes. Every single student who raised their hand offered me a sentence in Spanish on day 4 of Spanish 1. And the last student who offered a sentence was making it up on the spot. A couple of things that I wish I had done differently in that video were, obviously there were a couple of times when I didn't clearly indicate to students how exactly I wanted them to answer my question. But also looking back, I'm like, why wasn't I celebrating the heck out of those kids? Why wasn't I like making a huge deal about them speaking in Spanish in front of the whole class on our 4th day of Spanish 1? So yeah, as you can see, these video demos are like far from perfect, but those are some ways that I'm still seeking to strive and to grow. All right, so I know we have to wrap up here in a couple minutes, and I want to get those resources to you really, really quickly. I'm going to share with you in the chat some graphic organizers. This can be a great way to help students engage with your material, especially if you are maybe doing something that's a little bit more informational or a little bit more like story listening rather than story asking. Just having them use one of these graphic organizers, writing down, I usually have them write down in English, but you could have them write in the target language if you want, to just demonstrate their comprehension and help them just remember what you talk about, and maybe even build connections across classes. You could save the graphic organizers and say, each day we're going to talk about a different region of Ecuador. And you're going to compare and contrast these regions over 3 different days. And then at the end, we're going to look back at what we wrote and see if we can write a story about it. So I'll put those for you in the chat. We don't have time to do like breakout rooms or anything, but I encourage you to just take a moment to look back at what you wrote at the beginning of this session. Think about something great you already do to inspire participation in your classroom. I know that you have probably lots of things. And then maybe think about one thing, just jot it down quickly on your paper, one thing that you might want to take away and try this week. So thank you all so much for being, cancel. Thank you all so much. I almost closed my Prezi. Thank you all so much for being in this session today. I'm going to drop some resources for you in the chat, but feel free as I do that to unmute, ask any questions, type questions in the chat. Really appreciate your presence here today. All right. So I'm going to be dropping in, let's see, I'm going to be dropping in my handout that has all of these kind of explained in greater detail. It says that it's for a different conference because I didn't update the title. Sorry, Rich, but it's the same content.
Don't worry, we're not jealous here. That's okay.
Don't judge me.
Okay. I feel like this session, it deserves to be 3 hours long. I don't know, maybe we'll have to do it again sometime.
I like wish I could do an actual teaching demo with you all in real life, but I don't know, maybe sometime in the future.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So listen, on behalf of PSMLA, we want to thank everybody for attending this session with Lauren Fosnight. We welcome and encourage feedback on our sessions. You can use the link that's in the PDF program. Edith also put the link in the chat. She just did it again. The recording of this session will be available to the conference registrants after the event as well. And as a reminder for teachers in Pennsylvania, in order to qualify this session for Act 48 credit, you must complete the Act 48 reflection form, also found in the program, also found in the chat. Thank you very much for everybody stopping by. We really appreciate it. Enjoy what's left of the conference. Very little, very little. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. And Deborah, I'm going to drop a link for you in the chat to how to use Prezi with Zoom.